Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And when he returned to Capernaum, that is Jesus, after some days, it was reported that he was at home. And many were gathered together so that there was no room, not even at the door. And he was preaching the word to them. And they came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. And when they could not get near him because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him. And when they had made an opening, they let down the bed on which the paralytic lay. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "My son, your sins are forgiven." Now some of the scribes were sitting there, questioning in their hearts, "Why does this man speak like that? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" And immediately Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they thus questioned him themselves, said to them, "Why do you question these things in your hearts? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Rise, take up your bed and walk'? But that you may know this, that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic, "I say to you, rise, pick up your bed, and go home." And he rose and immediately picked up his bed and went out before them all, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We never saw anything like this." It is my conviction, albeit maybe a personal one, maybe you guys share it, that every account of Jesus' healing of someone is a microcosm for salvation. That in some way it illustrates, each account illustrates a different aspect of salvation. So when Jesus responds to, say, the man at the pool of Bethesda, he has not a whole lot of faith, and Jesus says, "Well, I'm going to heal you anyway." That communicates something about salvation. When he heals a leper that's unclean, that tells us something about salvation. When he heals someone that's crying out, "Son of David, heal me," that means something about salvation. And so here in Mark 2, 1 through 12, I see a number of very interesting insights into what salvation means. So the first thing I noticed is the interesting way that the paralytic's friend's faith was salvific for the paralytic. It is very common for Jesus to respond to instances of faith in the people that he's healing. One of the most popular phrases of his is, "My son, your sins are, your faith has healed you. Go in peace," or some variation of that. But we never see anywhere else besides this episode Jesus responding to the faith of a third party on behalf of the person that he's healing. I just find that extremely, extremely interesting and extremely poignant for a culture such as ours, which places such a high emphasis on personal will and personal choice when it comes to salvation. The fact that someone else's faith might be salvific for me, or that my faith might be salvific for somebody else, is a very intriguing thought. I think it's worth exploring, and we'll come to that later. Second, there seems to be an interesting relationship between the healing of the paralytic's physical ailments and the forgiveness of his sins. Jesus' authority to do one is solidified by his ability to do the other. And I wonder if we, as a church in our missions and in our evangelism, hold that tension together as well. Do we bring people a gospel of forgiveness of sins only? Or do we only bring them resources to stem oppression and poverty? What I think this text is telling us to do is to find some way to hold these things in tension. So that's the second thing we're going to be looking at later. And thirdly, that this episode of salvation and healing focuses on sin, I think is very poignant, again, for our culture, which I feel tends to emphasize healing more than forgiveness of sins. Because Jesus turns the tables on what is expected in this passage. The friends bring the paralytic to Jesus in order to be healed. But the first thing Jesus does is forgive the man's sins. And so I think that is also very interesting, and we will explore that in more depth. So in beginning, I want to look at the faith of the paralytic's friends and kind of try and understand why it was salvific and how that might affect us as 21st century listeners, readers of the text. We don't know a whole lot about the relationship between the paralytic and the paralytic's friends. All we know from the text is that there were a bunch of people trying to see Jesus, and 4 of them brought a man on a stretcher that was paralyzed. But I think we can infer from their determination and their willingness to destroy private property that they cared about this man, and that they loved him very deeply and were committed to getting this man before Jesus. I don't think they were just strangers on the side of the road that the paralytic hired to get him before Jesus. That's not the sense that I believe the text wants to communicate to us. And we all know people like the paralytic. We all know paralytics in this world. Maybe they are the physically handicapped. But I think more often than not, the paralytics we know are the mentally handicapped, the emotionally handicapped, the spiritual handicapped. Maybe they are paralyzed in drug addictions or alcoholism. Maybe they're the chronically abusive or violent. We all know people like this, and hopefully our hearts all break for people like this. And I believe what this passage offers us is a hope that our love for these people and our faithfulness to present them before Christ and to present them with the gospel in a life-transforming community, that is going to mean something to God, that he's going to see that, and he's going to have mercy on their lives. And I believe this text kind of controversially gives us a hope that may be salvific for these people, that their paralysis is complete, and that our inclusion of them in our community means that in some way perhaps God will have mercy on them